What should you do when your salami starter culture has expired? That's one of the biggest concerns that aspiring salamists have because, let's face it, salami cultures aren't cheap. And often they feel like there is no way they can make the amount of salami that the starter culture is capable of making before it expires. So today we are going to put a definitive answer on that question. Here in front of me, I have got a bag of expired starter cultures. I've got all kinds of different types in here, and their expiration dates vary from 1 year to over 3 years ago. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick out 3 starter cultures, and we're going to make the exact same recipe using those 3 starter cultures just to see what happens. Let's take a look at the cultures. All right, let's see what we're working with. Now, be sure to stick around to the end of this video because I'm going to share with you 3 tips on how to extend the life of your starter cultures. As we open up the bag, you're going to notice that they all vary in expiration time. First one we got right here is Flavor of Italy. And when you look at the best use before date, the middle number is the month. The first number is the date. So this expired June the 17th, 2022, 1 year and 3 months ago. All right, so this is a good candidate for our recipe. Our next starter culture is LHP Dry, also expired over a year ago, but this particular starter culture is better for tangy salami, and Patina is not tangy, so we're not going to be using that one. FLC, notice this starter culture expired April of 2020. That was 3 years and 5 months ago. Definitely a good candidate. We've got BLC 78 that's also expired, but this starter culture is really more designed for whole mussels, and the recipe we're making is not a whole mussel recipe, so that's not going to work. TSPX expired August 2020. That's 3 years and 1 month ago. I'm loving that. And then this final one is SM194, expired January of this year, so only expired 8 months. So it looks like we have 4 starter cultures that are viable for this experiment. And what I'm going to do is just pick the 3 that are most expired. So we've got FLC, TSPX, and between SM194 and Flavor of Italy. Flavor of Italy is expired 1 year, 3 months. This one wins out. All right, so let me put these up, set it back in the freezer, and let's begin. So the recipe we're making is Patina. That's an Italian meatball salami. And we're going to start with Flavor of Italy. Now, notice I'm shaking the bag. I just want to make sure that the powder is loose, and it is. And I'm pouring the starter culture into the spoon. I'm using a 1/4 teaspoon of starter culture in a little less than a 1/4 cup of water. And we're just going to let that starter culture rehydrate for about 30 minutes. Between each pour, I did clean out the spoon so that I wasn't cross-contaminating any of the starter culture. And just so you know, the minimum amount of starter culture that I'll add to any recipe is a 1/4 teaspoon. Now, if the recipe calls for more, obviously I'll add more. But if I'm making a small batch, the minimum I'm going to add is a 1/4 teaspoon. And I know some people like to weigh their starter culture out. I don't personally recommend that, and we'll cover that in a different video. Let's go ahead and do the last one. This is FLC. Now, if you're familiar with starter cultures, you'll know that all 3 of these starter cultures can ferment in a similar area. They basically ferment with the same amount of humidity and roughly the same amount of heat. The difference is the amount of time that it takes each starter culture to reach its target. So let me just go ahead and jot this down so I don't lose track of what is what. Of these 3 starter cultures, when they are fresh, Flavor of Italy ferments the fastest. The next would be FLC, and then TSPX would be the slowest. Now that I'm done with these starter cultures, I do want to place everything back into that vacuum seal bag and then just set it into the freezer. Towards the end of this video, we'll talk a little bit more about it. But now that that's vacuumed up, into the freezer it goes. We're going to let this rehydrate for 30 minutes while we get our meat prepared. Patina is an absolutely amazing salami. It's like a meatball salami that doesn't have a casing. I'll put a recipe link in the description box below if you feel like giving it a go. But we're basically making 3 kilos. I'm going to have 3 1-kilo batches, and each batch is going to be identical. All 3 are going to have the exact same spices. I mean, they are literally identical. And then we're going to come back and add the same exact amount of wine to each one of them. And that's it. Once we do that, we're going to give it a mix in our KitchenAid stand mixer. I'm going to mix approximately for 90 seconds for each batch. That's usually how long it takes with this little KitchenAid. And we're going to start with Flavor of Italy. Now, I'm not going to show you each one of them being mixed, but you get the idea. We're going to mix it till it's nice and sticky. Like I said, minute and a half, and we are good to go. Once this is mixed properly, culture included, I did clean and rinse out the bowl in between each batch so there wasn't any cross-contamination. And we're just going to make our meatballs. Once we get our meatballs formed, they get dipped in wine and a polenta coating, and your patina is done. Now, I did change the polenta and the wine between each batch as well. And this is what it now looks like. We've got our 3
Versions of Patina, the only difference being the starter culture, everything else is identical. And proper fermentation requires two parameters, humidity and temperature. We need a humidity of at least 90 to 95%. And as far as temperature goes, we need to be between 70 and 85 Fahrenheit. All three of these will ferment beautifully if those conditions are met. Fortunately, my kitchen is the exact temperature that I could just leave these on the counter. I think it's like 75 Fahrenheit. I do want to take the pH before as we go into this project so that you could see what it is. This is TSPX. Let me just stick that into the side right here and see where we're at. Sorry it's so blurry, but it says 5.49. All right, 5.49. That's TSPX. This one is FLC 5.5453. Very good. The typical pH of fresh meat is between 5.6 and 5.7, FYI. The higher the pH, the more alkaline your meat is, the older the meat is, right? It's not super fresh and may not be suitable for salami. So you want to always try to get super fresh meat. Flavor of Italy comes in at 5 point, what does that say? 5.1. Sorry once again for the blurry shot. All right, 5.53. Okay, so that's the starting pH. I'm going to go ahead and close that up so it doesn't give me any problems later on down the road. And all we're going to do here is cover this with cling film because that's going to help maintain that humidity. We're going to leave it on my kitchen counter. And the first one we're going to test is Flavor of Italy. That one expired 1 year and 3 months ago and is usually the quickest to ferment. So we're 20 hours into the ferment. The original pH is 5.53. Remember, for the salami to be safe, it needs to be under 5.3. With Flavor of Italy, we try to target a 4.9 to a 5.0. And it looks like after 20 hours of fermenting, this expired starter culture did its job. 4.91. Absolutely no problem. So this culture that expired 1 year and 3 months ago fermented this patina beautifully. No problem. The next one we're going to look at is FLC. Expired 3 years and 5 months ago. I'm curious as to how this one's going to perform. A total of 24 hours have elapsed during the fermentation process. And remember, the original pH was 5.53. Let's go ahead and give this one a quick test. After 24 hours, we are at 4.99, 5.02, 05. There we go. I think the end result was 5.06. And so this culture that expired over 3 years ago fermented this salami beautifully. The last one we're going to look at is TSPX. This one's expired 3 years and 1 month, the slowest of the bunch. And so I let this sit on my counter for 36 hours. And while TSPX typically prefers a lower temperature range for fermentation, like 65, 70 degrees, we did ferment on the higher side. It was about 80 degrees during the fermentation process. And so this is what it reads at 36 hours. 5.04. Okay, 5.04 after 36 hours. Original pH was 5.49. This performed beautifully as well. We can now put this in our drying cabinet.
All right, folks, there you have it. If you happen to have a salami starter culture, or technically a cheese culture that's past its expiration date or its best used before date, you've got nothing to worry about. It's more than likely still good. Just store it in the freezer. One quick test to tell if it's good or not is you should be able to shake the pack like you saw in this video and it feel and sound as if a loose powder is moving around. If you go to shake the pack and it feels more clumpy, like it's not moving around at all or maybe even a little damp, then more than likely that particular culture is spent and you might want to toss it. Let me share a couple tips with you that'll help you extend the life of your culture. As you saw in this video, we had some that have been expired for over 3 years, and they worked just as good as the day we got them. Tip number one, this should be obvious, store them in the coldest part of your freezer. You don't want to store them in your freezer door. You don't want to store them at the front of your freezer. Store them in the back part of your freezer that stays the coldest the longest. Every time you open and close your door, there's a temperature fluctuation. You don't want your starter cultures in that area. Like I said, keep it in the very back where it's the absolute coldest. Tip number two, store your cultures in a vacuum seal bag. Although you technically don't have to do this, this will certainly extend the life of your culture. I like this system because you can open and close the bag 50 or 100 times. You'll never waste the bags. You can just go in and reseal it. And the overall system bag and the little device included, I think it's like 20 or 25 bucks at the Sausage Maker's website. I'll put a link in the description box below if you want to check it out. But my tip here, keep it in a vacuum seal bag. This works for not only cultures that are bacteria, but also your mold cultures and obviously your cheese cultures if you're into making cheese. Tip number three, and my final tip, never dip your spoon into your starter culture. Always pour the starter culture into your spoon. And the reason I say this is because we don't want to introduce contaminants into the bag. The moment you start to introduce foreign contaminants, they can take hold, start growing, and that's what's going to inevitably shorten the lifespan of your starter culture. So always cut a little tip in the corner and pour your starter culture into your spoon. If it is a free-flowing powder like it should always be, it will pour literally no problem. All right, folks, thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions about expired starter cultures, let me know. And be sure to stay tuned because in an upcoming video, I've got 10 things that you need to be aware of when using salami starter cultures. You're not going to want to miss it. If you're new to this channel, take a moment, click that subscribe button and that notification bell. And if you got anything out of this video, be sure to give it a like. Thanks a lot for being here. Bye-bye.